Welcome to episode 47 of Valves, Rings, and Dirty Things, everybody. My name is Sean. I'm here with my co-host, Sam. Sam, how was your weekend now that it's a nice Monday afternoon?
My weekend was lovely, relaxing, spent some good quality time with the child, enjoyed decent weather, went out to the market, got to support some local farmers, and just looking forward to squeezing out as much of this summer time as I can.
Right on. I went to my last Renaissance Fair of the season, which was a bummer. Now I have to wait until next June before I can go fair again.
Or you can buy a ticket, come to Michigan, and enjoy 5 weeks of the Michigan Renaissance Fair, or Michigan Renaissance Festival, which starts, I think this weekend was actually its first.
Yeah, it's this first, last weekend.
Yeah, we did not go, but we should go. We have not yet.
That's a pretty expensive fair ticket, a round-trip airfare to Michigan and price of admission, but I'll think about it.
Yeah, you think about it.
4 more weekends to figure out if I can swing that, but we'll cross that bridge.
Well, we are here to talk about episode 8 of The Witcher Season 3, the season finale, the final episode with Henry Cavill as Geralt of Rivia. And we're going to talk about this episode in specific, go through the summary reactions, and we're going to look back on season 3 as a whole, and then the state of the show. Sean found a couple articles from some of I think it's an executive producer. We're going to discuss that, and then close the door on our Witcher coverage for the time being, unless there's some breaking news in the weeks to come.
Yeah, I'm ready to put this wounded animal down.
It's the humane thing to do.
It is. This season has been rough. I'm pretty sure we've lost viewership as we've covered season 3.
Talking about our podcast.
Our podcast.
Yeah, well,
listenership, I guess.
Our podcast is mirroring the Witcher on Netflix, because I think
the material we're covering.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but they saw a significant number of viewers not even finish the final season. It was similar, I think, to Rings of Power in many ways, unlike other properties. But anyway, that is something that we will cover in maybe a little bit more detail. But let's finish up our coverage of The Witcher Season 3, Episode 8. Here you go. Searching for Ciri, Yennefer and her fellow sorceresses raid Vilgefortz's fortress of Vulpane, but find it empty, save for the corpses of kidnapped Arethusan novices, and meet Philippa, who blames Tissaia for the tragic outcome of the Thanid coup. Back at Arethusa, a guilt-ridden and resigned Tissaia commits suicide. In Redania, King Vizimir orders Dijkstra to murder Philippa as punishment for the failed coup, but Philippa orchestrates Vizimir's assassination instead, crowning Radovid the new king. Yennefer travels to Brokilon and heals Geralt, who, joined by Jaskier and a Brokilon archer Milva, set out to save Ciri from Emhyr. Fringilla and Francesca arrive in Nilfgaard secretly plotting against Emhyr, but when Fringilla accidentally reveals the truth about Nilfgaard's part in the murder of her baby, Francesca leaves in anger, swearing revenge. Later on, Emhyr welcomes Ciri to the Nilfgaardian court, but seemingly unbeknownst to him, she turns out to be Terran, only posing as Ciri. Held captive by bounty hunters, the real Ciri is saved by a bandit group known as the Rats, who let her join them after she murders her captor, marking her first human kill. When the Rats ask her name, Ciri introduces herself as Falka. Sean, what did you think of episode 8, season 3 of The Witcher?
The best plot line so far, and that's what they might, if they continue with the season 4, and I think we've talked about this, if they continue with the series, I think the show should be called The Witcher Ciri Story. Because in this final episode, that was by far the most compelling storyline and the most compelling scenes. The interaction between her and the Rats, the inner conflict of giving up her magic, taking her first life, all of these things were far more compelling than what we saw in the other aspects of this episode and in the series, more or less. So I don't know. I'm excited if they end up focusing on Siri going forward. I'll have less problems going into season 4 if there is a season 4. But the rest of it, I mean, we can talk about the nitty gritty stuff of like, is it really unbeknownst to Amir that this isn't Siri? I think it's pretty obvious that he's in on it. I don't know. He doesn't want to look weak. He wants to consolidate power against the North. Everybody knows Siri's missing. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, okay, so let's.
Am I wrong about the Siri plot?
That it's the most compelling.
Yeah, at least in this final episode.
We spend, compared to the episode 7, we spend a pretty short amount of time with her. It's really just the one scene in the tavern, right? It's the two of them kind of orchestrating a little bit of an escape, and then the rest of the rats converge. There's the fight. Siri kills the person, and then she basically joins the rats. That was it. That was all we got, right?
And that was the best part of the episode.
I will say the fight scene was okay. I think here's my issue with the fight scenes is not that it's good action. I know there's been criticism of some of the fight choreography in the past. I'm not going to nitpick that necessarily. I think my issue with the fight scene, the rats fight scene, is that I didn't really care about any of those people. We didn't spend enough time with the quote unquote bad guys, the mercenaries, the bounty hunters, to really dislike them. And if I recall correctly from the book, that scene also featured some neutrals, some like the tavern owner, the inn owner, whoever, and a cook, and people who kind of got caught in the crossfire and didn't really get any time to add stakes to the fight scene. I'm never worried that Siri is going to be killed, right? Maybe that would be different if I hadn't read the books, but I also don't think a show watcher only is going to think that they're going to kill Siri in a random bar fight.
I mean, exactly. That's like watching Harry Potter and thinking Hermione or Ron's going to get killed.
Yeah, it's just, you're not going to do it. And so you really have them all just kind of dancing around pointlessly.
I disagree, because I don't think the point of the episode or that fight scene was to think that something could happen to Siri. I think the point of that scene in the episode was Siri taking her first life.
Yeah.
So I was never worried about Siri dying. I'm more interested in the impact of killing somebody has on Siri.
Right. And so what I don't need is a bunch of slow motion jump cut to fast action of every other kill in that tavern. All of that is background to the character moment of Siri making her first kill. And I think that's where it again, I'm not saying it was totally bad. There is one part about the rats stuff that I did not like, and it was the actual portrayals that those actors gave. This is the first episode where the portrayal, the acting jumped out to me as particularly noticeable and distracting. So I'm going to do my best to describe it. You have acted on stage, correct?
Yes, I have.
Okay. You've never acted in a movie or a TV show, correct?
No.
Okay.
I'm stage only.
Okay,
unless anybody out there's hiring, then I.
Yeah. Well, there's a strike on, so unless you want to be a picket and you cross the picket line.
I'll cross the line.
Okay, so I'm going to butcher maybe some of the specifics, but Ian McKellen, who portrayed Gandalf.
Oof, tough comparison.
I know, right? Yeah, no. Well, so hold on a second, though.
These child actors suck. Why can't they be more like Ian McKellen?
Well, no, I think it's all about technique and not about actual talent. So Ian McKellen is a stage actor more so than he is a film or television actor. I think he got his start on the stage. He's appeared in many, many Shakespeare plays. He was in a movie with Brendan Fraser called Gods and Monsters. Have you ever seen it?
No, but
it was
A-list actors.
Yeah, it was
a good title.
This is Brendan Fraser was really young. I think this was before The Mummy. This was, he's in his early 20s. Ian McKellen plays an older I think he was a Hollywood producer or director. Brendan Fraser is his assistant, and there's sexual tension between the two of them. There's kind of a generational tension between the two of them. I vaguely remember the movie, but what I do recall is that there was an interview with Ian McKellen talking about what it was like to work with Brendan Fraser, and he goes, "I hope someday to be as good of a film actor as Brendan," and it kind of threw the interviewer, because the interviewer was not expecting Ian McKellen to say Brendan Fraser was a better actor, and so there was a discussion, and Ian McKellen clarified that acting for the film, or for a film or a TV show, requires much more nuance than acting on the stage. In fact, the stage requires much more exaggeration because you have to accommodate a viewer's naked eye in the room. And so somebody in the back of the theater has to have a sense of what you're doing in a way that a film or a TV performance does not, because if a film shown in the theater is going to be blown up on a big screen and very subtle things can come across more easily. In a TV, you might be in a smaller screen, but you're closer to it, and so it's easy to see these things. So case in point, and how this relates to my dislike of The Witcher, the actors portraying the rats, and to a similar extent, the actress who portrays Milva, they are acting as if they are on the stage, and so their gestures, their facial expressions, the way that their bodies move are all exaggerated, and they look like children or like animals who are moving in very exaggerated manners, who are looking in very exaggerated ways, where normally you would just have somebody moving their eyes to look at somebody. The actors are moving their entire faces, they're tilting their heads, they look really weird. I don't know if you caught on to this, but that was the thing that really dragged me out of the scenes that didn't involve the fighting with the rats. And then we can talk more about the Milva portrayal, because I think there's some additional stuff there. Anyway, long section. What's your reaction to everything I just said?
I think my overall reaction to everything you just said is, I mean, you're going to think that because that's what you thought. I guess for me, it's more, if you read the books, the rats are basically like child Robin Hoods, and they come across, to me, exaggerated. They come across to me as exaggerated in the books. So what I'm seeing in the show doesn't really take me out of it, because to me, it's an exaggeration. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think
because the characters themselves in the books are so over the top already in terms of how they act and what they do, and this whole idea of like, we're outlaws and we're children, and let's all go be like preteen children together and rob people and kill people and be outlaws. Anyway, that's my take on it.
Okay, I mean, I think it's possible to do that and have a portrayal that doesn't come off as obviously as the portrayals of the rats did. And I think some of it is the direction that they're getting. Okay, so one other quick little, this is much shorter than my Gods and Monsters anecdote, was listening to a podcast with Dak Shepard and Robert Downey Jr., so armchair expert. Robert Downey Jr. was relating a quick little idiom or a saying that his dad coined, which is, everybody can act, some people can direct, nobody can write. And I was thinking about that in the context of The Witcher, where we have the nobody can write is pretty obvious in many of these cases. A lot of our issues come down to writing. I think direction is part of it, and I think that actually might even be some of the portrayals that I have an issue with, is they were told to do that, and it's nothing with the actors. It's just all of the kind of head movement makes them look it's distracting, and it doesn't add to their characterization that you're talking about, which is like, they're these kind of used preteen murderous Robin Hoods, which, fine, we saw them slaughter a group of people in a tavern. We really haven't seen them do much of the charitable side or the thieving of Robin Hood, and we'll give them plenty of room to do that. But It was really just the choices in the acting and potentially the way that they were directed to act that detracted from my enjoyment of kind of their introduction. But to your point about having the show focus on Siri, we are going to get the Rats. Apparently, it was in development, at least a Rats spinoff or a Rats specific show. I think it details what happens to what happens to all of them as they become the Rats before they meet Siri.
That sounds awful. Next up, I don't know. Do you want to do the Vilgeforts? Is it? I mean, really,
Well,
we don't have to talk about each specific plot line in this episode because there's like 5 of them.
No.
Is there anything else you wanted to touch on in terms of plot lines in this episode?
Well,
before we move on to articles.
Want to continue my criticism of some of the acting and potentially the directing. This is, I would lay at the feet of probably the writers, the directors, and potentially the actress as well. But the portrayal of Milva is incredibly aggravating to me. I'm not alone in this. Haley also really does not like the way that her actor is doing it. The lines are delivered really weirdly. It's unclear. In the book, we know very clearly that she is not a dryad, that she doesn't live in Brokilon. She just kind of works in the forest. And by the end of the interaction with her and Geralt, she actually has a crush on or loves Geralt in some manner, but is gruff. And that was a really fun thing to experience in the book. And none of that is coming through in the show. It's, who she is and what she is confusing. There's really obvious dialogue between her and the head dryad character talking about, your dark past or whatever. And I didn't like any of the stuff with Milva.
It all seemed forced. It felt like, again, like with most of the show, she's a character that needed to be in it. So they just wrote her into it.
Funny thing is, she doesn't need to be in it at all. She doesn't show up in the book series until the next book. Like, she's at the beginning of the next book, right?
I mean, she departs with Geralt. She kind of saves him, right after he leaves Brokilon. So it tracks.
But he doesn't leave Brokilon. I mean, okay, so in the show, they have him leaving Brokilon at the end of this episode. But in the books, he doesn't leave until the beginning of the Baptism of Fire.
I mean, okay, but then you could just say that this episode is covering the beginning of the next book.
Sure.
All the plot lines. I mean, if you did a direct, he can't leave in this season until this point in the book, then it doesn't really matter. But my point is, when he leaves Brokilon, Milva's with him. And he leaves Brokilon in this episode. Milva goes with him. And it just felt like she was in it because she was in the book. And there was no, I mean, you said when we talked about her in the last episode, there's like no introduction. She just shows up and talks to Jaskier as he's trying to enter Brokilon. That could have been anybody.
Yep.
Talking to Jaskier. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, this is an overall criticism of the entire series at this point. The show itself, almost everything feels forced. Nothing feels natural. The changes that they've made from the books to the show don't make sense. You have, news companies that cover TV and shows and movies agreeing with all of the assessments that we've made that the beginning of this season just was focused on fixing the mistakes of season 2, like all of the decisions the writers made to change things. And part of the problem is, especially with Rings of Power, is the same way. You have executives that have horse blinders on and can't admit that what they're making is bad or faulty. So I don't know. I mean, this executive that we're going to talk about, I'm not going to use his name, but we can talk about some of the articles that he's interviewed for, and I find his comments to be problematic. But he said in one of the articles that he wanted and pushed for the writers to be able to have their own creative judgment in making changes to the source material. And that's what gave us season 2. So I don't know if it's going to be the same thing with Rings of Power, where that executive isn't listening to anybody outside of Amazon Studios. And I'm sure this guy isn't listening to anybody outside of his, I guess it's Netflix Studios or whatever production company is putting on The Witcher.
Yeah, I I would want to differentiate between executives who are responsible for the business aspects of this, as far as what gets greenlit, what the budgets are going to be, when things get canceled. Those would be the kind of the big decisions, and then more of the creatives. So your showrunners, your writers. I would even put the executive producers and directors in that bucket as well, where you have a lot of the negative criticism of The Witcher is directed at the writers and at the showrunner, who also does a lot of writing, Lauren Schmidt Hissrich. And where I think we're going to have a difference between what Netflix does and what Amazon does is Amazon has already said you get 5 seasons. I think it's 5, either 4 or 5 seasons of the Rings of Power without even seeing a pilot, right? That's already greenlit. So the business decision about how much show you're going to have has already been made at Amazon. And there was a bunch of other criticisms of the Amazon Studios executive who, things like, oh, that's not consistent with any conversation that I'm having regarding the Rings of Power negative reaction. Just things that indicate she is completely out of touch with the business side of things, but she's not necessarily a creative. We'll reserve continued comment for the Rings of Power creatives. We've already been clear that we think the farther away the 2 showrunners are from the show, the better it is. But with The Witcher, I think we are more likely to see the executives at Netflix pull the plug because they've done it with other shows. And with The Witcher, you had a well-received season 1. You had this inertia building. Then you had season 2. You had Blood Origin, which came out and were not well received. I think Blood Origin is probably one of the worst rated shows or series on Netflix.
Yeah, I watched it. Didn't like it very much.
Yeah, I think the anime movie, The Nightmare of the Wolf, was better
Nightmare of the
received.
Wolf I actually really like that one. So
yeah, maybe we can talk about that on the show or on our show. But so by the time that those two bad things happened, season 2 and Blood Origin, season 3 was already under production. Then you had the stuff with Henry. And so Netflix as a business is in a position to pull the plug now. And there's speculation that the writer and actor strike will be kind of the cover that they need to pull the plug. Whereas with Amazon, it's, we're going to get it whether we like it or not. And so we might actually see the bad decisions of the creatives actually lead to negative consequences where the executives are going to have their heads screwed on straight. Now, we're going to talk about what that executive producer was saying, but I think that is just people trying to CYA and point the finger and hope that they get some traction in their attempts to do so that they at least salvage their reputations, if not their jobs.
So we already mentioned the first article, just the executive producer giving the writers the freedom to kind of make changes to the source material, which gave us season 2 and all the mistakes that it made. Another article, more recent, he compared the character of Geralt of Rivia to that of Batman, James Bond, and Superman. That it was inevitable that a character as prolific in society as Geralt of Rivia, that he would be recast. Now, to me, that's insane. Because if you ask the normal person just on the street, who's Geralt of Rivia, I still think, even with the success of the Netflix show, that a majority of Americans don't know who Geralt of Rivia is. That it's a Polish novel that didn't make it to the US until like the 2000s.
Yeah.
And this show did a pretty good job of expanding the number of people, like where the standing is in the cultural zeitgeist of where The Witcher is. But it's not even close to Batman, Superman, and James Bond.
Well, I mean, the other thing is that you look at the James Bond, for instance, they didn't know that the James Bond franchise was going to be as long lived and successful as it has turned out to have been. Those first the initial Sean, and by the way, Sean Connery wasn't James Bond for 3 movies. He was James Bond for, I think, 6 movies or something like that. It was a significant run, and those stories are also more episodic as opposed to a series, such as, I mean, the underlying material that James Bond is based on, the novels of Ian Fleming, those are not an overarching plot line that spans, 5 or 6 books. Their
Mhm.
one book is one challenge and it's over. So it doesn't really matter that it's the on-screen portrayal would be different, because James Bond is usually facing off, Spectre pops up in a lot of the movies, but the actual the plots are different, basically.
And it's a
Uh,
different take on the character every time.
yeah, but the other thing about James Bond is, like, it doesn't really matter who portrays him because the character is the same.
I mean, there's different nuances though. Let's go beyond James Bond. Superman and Batman. Every
Yeah,
time Superman or Batman, two other characters referenced by this executive, every time that there's a new actor, there's a new iteration, it's a different portrayal of the character. It's
I,
jarring to have, it would be jarring because he even quoted as saying, we want Liam to be able to do his version of Geralt. We don't want him to do Henry Cavill's. So then, I mean, what are we going to get? We're going to get a scene, the last episode of season 3, where Henry Cavill's Geralt walks away with Yaskir and Milva, and you see they're all three of their backs as they're walking down the road. And then the next scene in season 4, episode 1, is the front of Liam Hemsworth doing a completely different take on Geralt. Like
no, it's
it,
gonna be
it makes no sense.
it's total CYA. I mean, that's the thing. That's this executive producer doing their best to not admit that the decisions of the writers and the showrunner drove away the main star. And there's no two ways. And remember all those stories that came out about how Henry Cavill was toxic, and he would be sitting in his room, his dressing room, playing video games. Like, I bet he was playing The Witcher. He was probably reading The Witcher, and he would have ideas for how his character was going to be portrayed. And anyway, so I mean, all the comparisons to these other characters, I think Batman is the one where it's the most jarring, because we've gotten a few different iterations of Batman, and that is, to your point, it is so obvious that those are different Batmans in each of the iterations that we get. Thinking of the most recent portrayals, where we had, I have not seen the Flash movie, so I can't say what the new Michael Keaton Batman is like, but specifically the Christopher Nolan trilogy, where you have Christian Bale.
I mean, but old Michael Keaton.
Yeah, but I haven't seen Batman and Batman Returns in years. I'm thinking just take the three of Christian Bale, Ben Affleck, and Robert Pattinson. 3 very different Batmans and 3 very different film properties. Each of them had their pluses and their minuses. I actually kind of liked all those Batmans, and they were different. Batman is also, I think, just intrinsically more interesting than Superman, more of like a character that you can like and dislike parts of, and there's more to do. But the I don't I don't think it's studios, like, it's also not necessarily the intention of the DC studio, specifically thinking of Batman and Superman, to have all these different actors portraying them, as opposed to what you brought up in the pre-recording discussion, Marvel, who I think has recast exactly one major character in the entirety of the MCU. Terrence Howard portrayed
I know, but I
the
don't consider that major.
well, I mean, okay,
To me,
so
I mean, it's like that recast is like Katie Holmes being recast in the Batman trilogy. To me, it's a side character.
sure. And I mean, but it's
But
that being said, if you're going to have one recast, I mean, how many different movies were there?
oh
In
god, like
like
20 something.
20
Yeah.
some movies, you had all these different characters, you had one change, and there wasn't a bunch of fanfare over it. It just happened, and then they moved on. And again, the portrayal of that character it was relatively minor and it didn't affect the portrayal of the character, and they didn't need to come out and justify how it's, Don Cheadle is going to have a huge different take on War Machine. He was just Tony Stark, Iron Man's buddy. That's it.
Yeah, and it's different too because Don Cheadle didn't take over the starring role of the material. So it'd be like if Robert Downey Jr. halfway through the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they recast him as somebody else. It's jarring. If what's his name?
It's like this. It's like if Viggo Mortensen was Aragorn for the Fellowship, the Two Towers, and then in Return of the King, he was replaced by Nicolas Cage.
Well, that's doing Liam Hemsworth dirty.
I'm just saying, like, like focal point character, major change.
Yeah.
Right. Like acting style, forget looks aside, like you can put anybody in a wig and a costume and they will look similar enough, especially for somebody who's got, a lot to work with, like Geralt. But it's nonetheless two very different people. But let's move on to that second article, unless there's another big point that you wanted to talk about with the comparison to these other pop culture figures.
No, take it away.
Well, so this one, same executive producer, pointed to the stupidity of the American audience as the justification for changes to the plot from the books. Was there any charitable way to interpret those comments in your mind?
No, I guess to me, my understanding of his comments were more, they made the changes. And I guess it's open to interpretation because I don't know exactly what he was referencing. I just saw his comments. When I read what he said, to me, it was more Americans couldn't, or the audience in general couldn't handle the changes that they made in season 2. So they kind of had to, quote unquote, dumb it down. That's my quote, to reflect the books more. So they couldn't be as creative in season 3. To me, that was my understanding of what he was trying to get across. Unless you think that he made those comments to back his changes in season 2. But I can confirm Robin Briggs, my mother, read the books, watched season 2, and was so confused as to everything that was going on that, again, I don't think the changes were good for the viewer. And I don't know if they necessarily helped the reader. And I don't think they necessarily helped the non-reader because it just made everything way more confusing. At least if you're following the book plots, you have a storyline. You have something that people can follow.
I mean, the season 2 decisions are baffling in retrospect. Anytime you blame your audience, even if and again, I would like to find a charitable way to interpret his comments, but anytime you invoke the stupidity of your audience after your product has been received very negatively, there's really no way to come out of it looking anything other than contemptuous.
Yeah, and I think we can agree that, or we can agree to disagree on what he exactly meant by his comments, but we can agree that him saying that the reason the show is getting so low ratings is because the viewers are too dumb to appreciate what they're giving us. That's where we can agree that he's an asshat.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, I will grant that the plot of the books is or could be complicated to adapt, but only if in doing so, you are choosing to de-emphasize The Witcher and emphasize the other plot lines that are not as present in the books, because then you just have less screen time to tie it all together, which is how things like the world building fell apart and how it's not totally clear all of the actors at the Thanded coup, or they have to do all of this really obvious characterization of Geralt and Yen as being a family, because in the adaptation they chose to make it more complicated by juicing up things that were not included in the books or were only referenced in the books and explained later, such as the Dijkstra Philippa stuff. I mean, what I would say is maybe your writers are too stupid to adapt your material. Don't blame your audience. I think if you do a complicated plot well, your audience is going to be along for the ride. And I think there are plenty of shows that demonstrate that very well, and people love watching them, and they're worth rewatching because interesting plots come together, and you're not confusing your audience by not allowing things to develop and then rushing things and trying to cover it up with showy action scenes at the final episodes that don't have any underlying emotional stakes.
Take that, writers everywhere on every project. Sam hates all of you.
That's not true.
I know, I'm just kidding. Overall thoughts on the season. I know you don't like doing ratings out of 10 Witcher amulets, but I'm going to make you do it. Okay. Out of 10 Witcher amulets, what did you give it?
2.
Season 3. 2?
2.
I think I'm going to go 3.5. Yeah. Because it wasn't as bad as season 2, and I'm pretty sure I gave season 2 a 2.
Season 2
was probably the most disappointing season of television for any of my favorite series that I've ever seen.
Season 2, I will say, when I first watched season 2, I don't think I had read the books yet. And so I was
a little ignorant.
Yeah. And so for me, my initial impression of season 2 was, okay, well, that's something. Because mainly I didn't know where the Yennefer and Ciri relationship was going to go. Only in retrospect is it's obvious how terrible season 2 is. And I think and that may be one of the reasons why with season 3 you saw things fall off a cliff, is because your non-book reading audience, your non-video game playing audience isn't going to understand the damage that season 2 does to the important relationships. Mm-hmm. It's only at the beginning of season 3 where you have all these really, I won't say weird scenes, but very forced scenes, and again, not allowing things to develop naturally and kind of speeding us along, that those things come into relief. It was just over the course of season 3, we had this continued failure to adapt the book material properly. And then just looking at the show as its own entity, as its own product, there were just fundamental things that it failed to do, stemming largely from the writing, the overall direction, and then, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, very rarely, but seemingly obviously, some of the actual acting. Oh, and makeup too. The makeup for the season was just awful. Haley had the comment of all of that bronzer that Ciri is wearing finally paid off for her desert scenes.
Yeah, I mean, my overall thoughts are just disappointment, across the board.
Do you want to make a wager about cancellation?
Sure.
Do you think it's going to be canceled?
Do I think it will? Yes.
Okay.
Do I think it will before we get a season 4? No.
Oh, okay.
I think we'll get season 4. I think we get one season of Liam Hemsworth as Geralt. And I think when that happens, viewership plummets, even from what it's already plummeted. And I don't think it can continue into season 5.
That is probably the most likely outcome. So I'm not gonna wager anything against you, because that's probably what will happen. Now, if you had to put a percentile or a percent chance of season 4 not happening, what would you put that at?
33.
Okay, that's a little bit higher than I thought you might go. Okay, so
yeah, I'm going to say two-thirds chance that we get a season 4.
Okay, so we will see.
And really only because the current strike is so fluid. This could last quite a while. So I think the longer the strike goes, the higher my percentage chance of it not happening goes up. So at least where we're at today on August 21st, I'm at a 33% chance.
Okay. I would agree both with your comment that the longer the strikes go, the the higher the chances of cancellation, just because it pinches the studio every day that they're not making new products. And I would add to that, if we have any sort of kind of macroeconomic downturn, budgets are going to have to be trimmed. You're seeing the higher interest rate across the board is doing a lot to the ease with which these companies can just spend money on products that are not growing viewership. Netflix has a track record of canceling shows that perform, such as the Witcher has performed. So,
dude, the television market is so bad that the Pac-12 became the Pac-4.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, something that used to be a cash cow like college football, they're starting to suffer as well. So,
and I mean, I kind of want them to continue to suffer, because frankly, I hate watching college football on television, except for when Joel Klatt is announcing Michigan football games. There's at least a little bit of redeeming quality there, but they take forever, tons of commercials. And what it really does is it degrades the quality of actually going to the game, because you're just bombarded by television timeouts.
Mm-hmm.
And real quick on this, I think Michigan State football.
Yeah, dude, like 3 games are going to be on Peacock.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to buy 5 different, or they're on 5 different channels or something crazy. It's just, there's such contempt for the viewer at this point that unfortunately they have people, by the balls, basically, where what are you going to do? Not watch college football? People craft their whole identity around watching and rooting for their college team. So you're going to, if you're a Michigan State Spartan, you're going to bend over and get Peacock.
And yeah, that's the bet that they're hedging, right? Is people are going to complain, but in the end, everybody's going to get Peacock so they can watch those 3 football games.
No matter how bad the Michigan State Spartan football team is this year, no matter how many terrible off-field incidents there are, or on-field incidents for that matter, no matter how many allegations swirl around, how many charges are filed.
Okay, you Michigan alumni, when you have your head coach currently being suspended for...
they're just doing that to stick a finger in the NCAA's eye, and which I endorse, because they're a bunch of hypocrites. This is not going to turn into a college football podcast.
Here's the thing. I'm a Michigan fan, and I'm like, dude should sit out at least 6 games.
He bought a hamburger.
Oh, it's more than he lied to the NCAA.
No, he didn't. And there's no proof. Yeah, I don't know. The thing is, the only reason they're going after Michigan and Jim Harbaugh is because Michigan's the only school that would take them seriously, because all you need to do is look at every other team, especially teams in the South, and the stuff that they get away with and the stuff that they got away with for years pales in comparison to whatever it is Harbaugh is being accused of. And even if all of it is true, I mean, there's the ridiculous treatment of Tennessee is just the most recent egregious example of the NCAA being a complete joke organization. Rant over.
Well, this is not a college football podcast.
Was there anything else about season 8
season 3,
episode 8?
No, I mean, no, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm done with The Witcher. I hope we don't have to cover a season 4 if they end up doing it. Otherwise, I think I'm going to try to persuade you to do my little Tolkien one-off episode next week. It'll be a fun little fantasy football since we just had our fantasy football family league draft over the weekend. We can carry fantasy football into the world of Tolkien, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, if you want to draft or design a
rules for the
game,
I'm
down. Let's do it.
Right on.
Okay.
Maybe we'll have a guest for next week.
I was trying to set up Haley to maybe potentially join. She wanted to do, I was saying, sometimes she gives me quote unquote Haley hot takes when we're watching The Witcher, and I was seeing if maybe she would want to do a guest spot, but she declined. We record during our child's bedtime, and so Haley takes on that duty, but maybe some week we can schedule around and bring her on, or another guest of your choosing.
Yeah, we'll see. Bye, everybody.
Bye.